Sail Pensacola is about the business and fun of sailing on the Pensacola Bay. My name is Tim Reichon, and today I'll talk to Cam Farrah about her discovery and mastery of the A-class catamaran. Why? Because sailing is our business. Cam Farrah is arguably the most successful female sailor from Florida and without a doubt the most accomplished female sailor from the Gulf Coast. In this episode of Sail Pensacola, this 23-year-old will talk about her sailing origin, A-class catamaran racing, her victories, the future of competitive sailing generally, and the path for women specifically into competitive sailing. Welcome, Cam.
Hi, Tim.
Good to meet you, Cam. Good to see you. I'm glad you were able to take some time out of your schedule to talk. You are, without a doubt, one of the most successful racing sailors on the Gulf Coast. People are always interested in origins, and that's where I'd like to begin with you. Tell me about where and how you got your start in sailing and how you transitioned to racing.
Yeah, so I was super lucky to grow up on the Gulf Coast. I went to school in Destin, Florida, and I sail out of Fort Walton Yacht Club, which is super close to Pensacola. And the beautiful part about living in the Panhandle is that we get to sail year round. So it doesn't matter what time of year, I'm always out sailing. And growing up, my dad was a really big sailor. And I was pretty resistant to it at first. I was like, oh, like this is an old man sport. Like it's not that cool. And I remember one day I was out sailing in St. Andrews Bay with my dad, and the entire Red Bull youth foiling generation team was there. So there were all these young, very fit guys sailing these super fast catamarans. And I was like, you know what? I want to do that. And from that point on, I just, kept on sailing. I did all of the high school sailing that I could do back home in Fort Walton. And then I ended up sailing collegiately for Tulane in New Orleans. And then after that, yeah, just a ton of foiling racing. And it's been a great journey so far.
What were the boats that the Red Bull youth folks showed up with on St. Andrews Bay when you first saw them?
Yeah, so that was the Catterwall Regatta. And at the time, I was sailing a Seaboard NACRA 17, which was the Rio Olympic catamaran, with my dad. And one of the guys were on the NACRA 17, and I think a few others were on F-18 catamarans. But the best part about that regatta was it was a big A-class catamaran regatta. So they had the foilers, the non-foilers, and Sally Barcow, who's a pretty famous female sailor. Olympian. She's heavily involved, one of the founders of the Magenta Project. She had flown in to race an ACAT, foiling ACAT. She had never sailed a trapeze boat up to that point. Went out there, half the fleet was sitting on land. They were too afraid to race. She was the only woman and gets out there and was just kicking butt. And I saw her on the ACAT and I was like, one day I want to be just like Sally. And so from then on, I was like, the ACAT's going to be my boat. I'm going to sail catamarans. And I won that regatta a couple of years ago, and I've always returned to St. Andrews Bay because it's such a special regatta to me.
How old were you when that regatta occurred and had that first inspiration?
I want to say I was 16 or 17. So I always kind of felt like I was a little late to the game because a lot of kids have sailed opties since they were very young. But yeah, no, I got into it. I'd sailed but never raced competitively until 16, 17 years old.
So you didn't go through that usual opti kind of development pathway. You jumped right into high performance.
Yes, exactly. The Weta Trimaran was kind of my version of an opti because my dad and I had sailed that a lot together, and then I transitioned to sailing it by myself. But that was a great boat because you get to do apparent wind sailing and go fairly fast, and you get to be in charge of a jib and an asymmetrical kite and a mainsail all by yourself, and you're not going to get hurt on that boat. Like it's such a safe boat. I've tried to capsize it. I can't capsize it. Like it's just, just such a tough, well-built boat. So I loved sailing the Weta for sure.
Wow, but you have your hands full. You've got 3 sails.
Yeah, you really learn multitasking and how to prioritize and sail trim. So it was a great, great learning boat for me, and I still really enjoy sailing it.
Fantastic. What a great start. And what a sort of a non-traditional pathway into competitive sailing, not going through the kind of the traditional route of starting in opties and, going through that development pipe.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think I had sailed foiling boats before I had gotten into a laser. Like I did a backwards progression. I remember getting into laser and being like, how do I sail by the lee? Like, what's going on here? I'm a bit confused, but it's been great because I've gotten to do both over the years, gotten to really build up a good foundation in all types of sailing.
I want to talk more about foiling specifically, but your experience, it seems to me with wingboarding and other kinds of foiling experiences, wasps, and now we've got, variations of foiling dinghies like birdie fishes and flow ones. It seems likely that a lot of people are going to have their first sailing experience in a foiling boat now. You think that's the way it's going?
Yeah, I mean, it's so much more like glamorous to watch all the foiling and especially winging. Like it just makes foiling so much more accessible to people than it was like 10 years ago. The odds of you getting into a foiling boat day one were so slim. And now it's just there's a lot more stuff popping up, a lot of different manufacturers. And yeah, it's been really interesting to watch that progression over the last few years.
You mentioned the high school sailing program, and probably you've noticed one of our goals at Sail Pensacola is to make sailors. So we're really interested in understanding more about how to activate these school-based and community sailing experiences. So that's of great interest. Talk more about the high school and the school-based sailing program and its influence for you.
Yeah. So through high school, I was a competitive golfer, believe it or not. And so I would rotate between golf and sailing depending on the season. And the great part about sailing was it had two seasons. So you could really do it no matter what sport you were competing in on the side. Because I really do believe in competing in two different sports, taking different learnings from it. But sailing was always great because it just seemed super fun. And I would talk to my friends and different kids at the school about sailing, and they would come out and just enjoy it, maybe not focus so much on racing, just like let's cruise around on a 420. And once they get hooked on that, then it's like, all right, let's start phasing in some racing. Like, this is so cool. We get to travel to New Orleans for different regattas on the weekends, or we get to go to Mississippi and experience all these different things. And it's just so important to have kind of a catalyst like at your yacht club, who's willing to spend a lot of time trying to like gather people to try out sailing and have a good program and consistent coaching. At Fort Walton, it was incredible because Randy Smythe, great famous catamaran sailor, multiple time Olympian. His son was a couple years younger than me. So Randy would come out and coach us on the 420s, like
Wow.
2 days a week. And then the other 2 days, my dad would come out and coach the team. And I mean, we were all taking for granted like the quality of coaching that we were receiving. And then, finally we were realizing we're like, oh my God, like this is amazing. We're so fortunate to have access to such good sailors on the Gulf Coast. So yeah, no, it's great. Loved high school sailing.
Well, so was that Fort Walton Beach High School that had the sailing program?
Yeah, so Fort Walton Beach High School had a sailing program, and we shared the coaches and the facility at Fort Walton Yacht Club with Choctaw, which is the other high school over there. And then it was all kind of bundled under the Emerald Coast Sailing Association. So I think they maybe own the boats, and they provided the coaching. But it was really nice to share with another school, to share resources and practice together and stuff.
Well, we are going to study that model more on the Pensacola side because clearly
Yeah.
we have got a whole bunch of youth sailors that we need to activate, and getting a school based entry into the sport would be fantastic. We're talking about your developmental experience and how you were influenced by other sailors. Talk about your local, regional, national, and international influences. You mentioned Randy Smythe and obviously your dad. Who are the other people that figured into your inspiration?
Yeah. So, I mean, great sailors in the South, a lot of good role models to look up to. There's John Dane, who went to the Olympics, and Johnny Lovell were all really big factors in my life and kind of eventual Olympic dreams. But through the Magenta Project, I connected with a mentor, Katie Pettibone, and she did the Women's America's Cup, well, like the Women's America's Cup team back when they had it. And she's been a great guiding influence for me over the years, just to kind of talk through everything and navigate that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, just so many people have played really big roles, and Randy was a really big one, of course. And yeah, no, it's been really great. There's a ton of people to thank, and I've enjoyed every moment of the journey so far, for sure.
It sounds like you were really struck by catamarans at an early stage. What was how did you settle on the A class as your boat? And then obviously you've invested so much time and skill into that, but what was the thing that caused the A class to catch your attention and make it your boat?
Yeah, so the ACAT, I really liked it because it was single handed. And my dad always thought it was very important that I helmed, because it always felt like women had few opportunities to helm boats. And especially catamarans, we see a pretty big gap in the skill level of female helms. Although I will say the NACRA 15 has started to close this gap, and you're starting to see a lot more female helms in the NACRA 17 Olympic circuit because of that early pathway into catamaran sailing. But for me, I loved the ACAT because it was just the most challenging boat I've ever sailed. Like, just, I probably spent a year gaining the confidence to get the boat around the race course. Like every second on that boat at first was a struggle because it's so light. It's 160 pounds. And when it's foiling, I think some guys are hitting the low 30 knots. I've never gone faster than like 28.7. And I don't know that I need to go much faster than that on the ACAT. But it's incredible challenge to sail, but it's very customizable. So you can do a lot with the rigging, and you get to be creative. And yeah, it's just a really competitive fleet. A lot of former Olympians and just really high quality sailors. So that's really why I love the ACAT, for sure.
If you had been exposed, let's say, to the Wasp at that first regatta, would have that would have that grabbed your attention and would have you gone off in that direction instead of the ACAT?
Yeah, I feel like I just barely missed the Wasp explosion because I was a bit too old, definitely too old, too big to really sail the Wasp, and there wasn't a circuit. Like, now there's a great Wasp circuit in the US and Canada, and if I was like 16 years old and a girl right now, like, I would definitely be sailing the Wasp and competing. But at the time, I mean, maybe there are one or two kicking around the US, but it was definitely not like a real racing circuit. And the ACATs, I mean, we race all the time. Like, we have such a good circuit in the US. I mean, this winter alone, you could have done like, I don't know, five or six like major regattas with 40 boats on the line. And for me, that quality of racing, like, it's really hard to find in other fleets. And the sailors are good. I mean, you learn so much from these guys. So I really appreciate the high quality racing.
Well, you have been really successful in that class. In fact, you won the 2023 Women's World Championship. You finished 16th overall. You won the 2023 Under 25 category. And most recently, you were number one overall in the 2024 Midwinter. This is just extraordinary for any sailor and even more inspirational as a woman sailor. Talk about those accomplishments.
Yeah, I mean, the ACAT's been just such a great journey. I remember the first ACAT regatta I did, it's like St. Pete Nudes or something. I remember driving down with my dad because I was terrified towing the trailer alone. Like, you don't think about that, but to tow something down by yourself at first is really scary. And I remember driving down and being like, Dad, like, I just don't want to get last. Like, that's my only goal, right? And then I may have gotten last. I don't remember. But the next regatta, I would pick one person in the fleet and be like, my goal is to beat this guy. So I'm going to move up from last to like 29th place. And then each regatta, I just kept like picking away at the fleet. And like, at one point, I remember being like, Dad, like, my goal is to like be top three. Like, can you believe this? It's just been like this really steady grind of like constant sailing and training on that boat. I mean, in high school, I would sail the boat every single day after school with Bob Curry, who's another incredible local catamaran sailor. He's won like an absurd amount of national championships. But like, for me, it's just been a long, really good grind. And yeah, it was really nice to win midwinters. I'd never been down there either. Key Largo was beautiful. Like, it was just such fun, good racing. So I've enjoyed it a lot.
You are really inspired by this boat. Has I mean, it almost sounds like it's too good to be true. Have you had bad days, or is this just like 100% uptime for you in this boat?
No. Oh, so many bad days. I think some of my most frustrated moments I've ever had have been on the water on the ACAT. And but there's no one to be mad at but yourself, you know? So it's like you just have to get better. Like if something's going wrong in that boat, you're the problem. How do you solve it? How do you get more fit? Because I mean the physical demands on the boat are just absurd now that we've added in upwind foiling, and it's just a constant, seeking of improvement on the boat, which I really love.
The average sailor just really can't even envision what is going into this for you to have these accomplishments. We see you on the victory podium. We might see some cool Instagram posts, but we really have no idea what is behind that or what your life is like. Talk about your training, your typical day, and what it takes to be this champion you are.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that goes into it is a lot of boat work, prepping your boat, and whether that's measuring your foils and sanding your foils and running all of your systems correctly. I mean, that takes up a really significant chunk of time, especially on a boat as complex as the ACAT. And another chunk of the time is spent in the gym because I'm sailing in a fleet that is mostly men. I mean, there's seldom women in the fleet. And upwind foiling now puts a lot of strain on the body, and you've got to be so fit. I mean, before it was just you'd foil down when your heart rate would get ripping super high. But then as the fleet has progressed, now upwind's probably the most stressful, hardest part. So there's no breaks anymore. And when you go to worlds, you actually do 3 laps. So like the end of a world's race day is like I feel like I can't move, So there's a lot of fitness. So, kind of on a typical training day, probably wake up, do a bit of mobility because that's super important, especially when you're getting into weird wipeouts and stuff. You don't want to mess up your hips or anything, or your ankles or knees. And then, yeah, get down to the boat park, do some rigging, make sure everything is working, maybe debrief with whoever I'm training with at the time. And then we'll probably spend 3 hours very concentrated on the water. Any more than 3 hours at a time is pretty tough on the ACAT because it is so physically demanding. You kind of lose focus and it's not as efficient. So if you can spend a few hours out, come in, maybe have lunch and then debrief and then rig back up and go out again for another hour or two, that to me is probably the most efficient way to spend your training time. And then after training, I watch a ton of GoPro footage. I love analyzing GoPro. I think that's one of the best training tools you can use. I'm a big note taker as well. So, writing down settings and things that I've learned that day is very important. But yeah, it's kind of just a constant. If you're like during a real training block, like your whole day is revolving around the boat. You're not really doing anything else. And then you're sleeping and you're eating as much as you can because you're burning quite a few calories sailing those boats. And you want to be heavy too on the ACAS. So there's that whole other component of playing the weight game as well. So yeah, it's fun. It's a great fun thing to do.
The physicality is probably something that most sailors can't really have a window into. So I'm just wondering on this boat, at that 3 hour mark when you've been out there, where are you feeling the fit, the physicality of it? Is it legs? Is it back? Is it arms? Is it where? What is taking the toll on sailing that boat?
Yeah, so a lot of the load, believe it or not, goes into your forearms. Your forearms get really fatigued, and it's kind of something you notice across all high performance foiling boats because you're using as small line as you can. So you're gripping tiny line, and the loads are really high. So you're really working your forearm muscles, as well as all of your arm, your shoulder, bicep, because the pulling motion is constant. The ACAT and the NACRA are both unique in the sense that they don't have a wand or a self-leveling system for the foils. So your body weight and sail trim becomes the wand. So that's regulating the ride height of the boat. And on the ACAT and the NACRA, I mean, that's quite a big workout in your legs. Like I'm putting a lot of power into the boat with my front leg. And sometimes I'm pulling with my back leg against the foot strap. But each wave, I'm kind of jerking forward, stepping forward, running forward to keep the boat in the water and leveled. And on a really wavy day, I mean, my legs are like shaking on the downwind. It's like, it's very fatiguing, but it's cool to have all these different dimensions that you're playing with on the race course, as well as you're really thinking about tactics the whole time too. So you're trying to go fast, you're trying not to wipe out, and you're trying to be smarter than the guy next to you. So it's really fun.
Really demanding. It makes me think that we've kind of entered a luxury zone of foiling when you've got a wand to take care of the ride height issue. So I don't know, you get to focus on other stuff for some of the physicality of sailing the boat.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for a stable platform. I mean, the Nacro's the worst. The floor will just drop out on you for no reason. You're doing like 20 something knots and then you hit an air bubble. And the next thing you know, you're going 0 knots. Your crew's flying around the front and you're just sitting there dazed. What just happened? So, yeah, the wand is a nice invention for sure. And especially you see like some of the bigger foiling catamarans have like lasers that are leveling the bows. I don't know, the ETF 26s, maybe, and a few other ones. So that's pretty cool too.
Wow. Your sailing and racing accomplishments qualify you to knowledgeably comment on several areas of sailing. The perpetual question that comes up is how to get more kids in sailing, in particular, how to get young women to find a pathway into this sport. What are your thoughts on that?
It's such a great question, and it's awesome that people ask that. I really think, for me at least, the Magenta Project was probably like the catalyst that let me, sail in all these incredible opportunities. Without an organization like the Magenta Project, it would be a lot harder to get access to all these cool boats. For me, the mentoring program was huge. It's really helpful for young girls to have a role model and someone to look up to, and someone who can like talk you through different challenges that you're facing in the sailing world because they've already been through it. They can guide you. So yeah, I always recommend to any women that I meet, I'm like, you know what, you should apply for the Magenta Project for their mentoring program. That's a super great opportunity and very helpful. And I also think, like, for me, at least on the ACAT and at my yacht club, the biggest thing is like just inviting uh, youth and women out to sail your boats, even if it's just for like a day or something. Those opportunities, helps create interest in the boats, and then it just makes it more accessible for everyone. So the ACAT fleet, I'm always telling people, just bring someone out on your boat. They're not going to break it. Like, your boat's going to be fine. Have them sit there on the tramp and sail around really fast. But you never know, just taking that one person out, if that's going to hook them on catamaran sailing. We just had my good friend Kaylee just bought a classic A-class catamaran, so the non-foiling version. She was down in Key Largo and she did really well racing. But I mean, that was the first time in the US at least that we've had another woman sailing the A-cat that I've ever run into. So it was nice to see, we're adding to the number of women in that side of sailing. So yeah.
Probably an influence due to you.
Yeah, maybe. I hope so. She did great though. It was so much fun. It's nice to have another girl out there. I forget how lonely it can get at regattas, but the guys are wonderful in the fleet, but it is nice to have someone else to relate to for sure.
The integration of hydrofoils in sailboat design is now firmly established. Foiling is dominated by European manufacturers, and we see a corresponding uptake there among consumers. So the number of people participating in foiling classes of sailboats is huge compared to the US. So we're way behind on that. How do we get this to take off and happen in the US?
It's such a great question because I do feel like the US is behind on a lot of different areas of sailing as well, not just foiling. For foiling, I feel like winging might be the solution. Like, I've been down in Miami, I'm racing here, and there's so many people out winging. It's almost like looking out at Lake Garda, full of people foiling. So I wonder if that's going to make it more accessible. It's definitely more visible because of it. Before, when I told people I'd sail foiling boats a few years ago, they'd be like, what's a foil? And now they're like, oh, like the surfboards. And it's like, okay, the general public's kind of getting this idea of what foiling is. And I do wonder the impact that winging will have. It's crazy how quickly that's exploding. I've never tried it. I don't have great balance on board sports, so it might not be my exact ideal platform, but I think it's really cool and portable and just something different.
Is there any sense of what the trajectory of wing boarders is? Do they stay on wing boards for the rest of their sailing career, or do they jump into more, let's say, traditional sailcraft like catamarans, even like displacement boats, planing boats? Do they make their way into ocean racing? I mean, what happens to them, or do they just like stay wreck wingers?
I don't know. I know there is wingfoil racing now, so maybe there could be some crossover because of that. But it reminds me of back when windsurfing was kind of at its peak. You know, there were a lot of guys who still raced lasers and they did windsurf. So maybe there'll be some crossover. You know, being in tune with the wind, regardless if you're winging or sailing, is something universal that we all kind of love and share. And maybe they'll want to get into cruising or something, but I'm not sure. It's a great question for sure. It'll be interesting to watch.
In the US, we don't really have a lot of, I think, presence in the foiling classes. So I'm thinking the A class with its foiling component may have a pathway there. What are your thoughts about that as being like an influential class to bring people into foiling on the boat platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ACAT is great for that. In the last few years, we've done really well. My friend Ravi Parent won the Worlds in Houston 2 years ago on the ACAT foiling. So that was a really big deal for all of us. But I think the ACAT as a platform makes a lot of sense because it's, I mean, a third of the price of a Moth setup right now. Like, I hate to say the ACAT's a bargain, but compared to some of the other foiling options, it really is. And the quality of the racing is really, really high in the US. So I think it's a great option if you live in the US and there's a big fleet everywhere. And the fleet's at this great point right now where the newer boats, a lot of people have new boats, you know, 2020 newer, and it almost feels like one design because all of those clusters of boats are pretty much identical, the same platform. You're maybe changing the rigging a little bit, but like any one of those 2020 and newer boats can win a regatta. And there's a lot of them at events now. I think now they'll show up and there'll be like 10 or 12 identical boats, and that's a big deal for a foiling fleet. So yeah, it's cool.
Your experience with Magenta must have given you insight and experience with other foiling classes. Did you ever encounter a boat that almost tore you away from the A class to say, oh, hold it, I'm going to jump ship and go on that platform?
Honestly, no. I did a lot of 69F sailing. So that's the foiling monohull. And it was cool, but because it's such a strict one design class, a lot of the systems are not up to par, in my opinion. It just running rigging stuff, simple fixes, and the friction and the amount of physical strength required to sail that boat is really high. It's really demanding. And every time I was sailing that, I was like, oh, I'd rather be on my ACAT right now, you know, do the same speeds, and it's a little less demanding. And the Moth is great, but I mean, I'd rather sail an ACAT in 2 knots of wind than a Moth, you know. At least ACAT, you can sit on your butt on the tramp and not rock around. But no, it's been cool. I've enjoyed every foiling class I've done. And each one definitely behaves differently on the foil. So it's cool to take different learnings from all of them.
We've covered your origin, your past and recent accomplishments. What are your goals for the next 1, 5, and 10 years?
You know, honestly, my goal is to continue to love to sail. I don't want to get burnt out. And I think that's a really big deal, especially for a younger kids sailing opties and that kind of stuff. You don't want to lose the love for the sport. So that's always going to be my priority. And then for me, the ACAT is definitely my main boat. And I would love to get, you know, top 10, top five, and eventually win a Worlds. And it's one of those things that, like, if I get the right forecast, I feel like I have a shot and can hang with the big dogs. I've just got to keep showing up to Worlds and hope for kind of a medium light air regatta, you know. As long as it's not 20 knots every day, I feel like I've got a fighting chance every time I get out there. So I'm really enjoying that progression and still excited by it, which is good.
What's beyond the the world championship of the A class? Will you then jump into America's Cup stuff? Will you go ocean racing? Will you become a commentator? I mean, what's what's beyond that?
I don't know. I mean, the great thing is all my doors are still open. They're all left open. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'll see where the future takes me, but at this point, I feel like I've got my goal. I'm working towards it and just saying yes to every opportunity that presents itself, which is really good. So yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Congratulations on loving the sport most of all, and I hope you always can. You are a prolific and successful female performance sailor. You are the product of Gulf sailing, upbringing, and experiences, and I think provide a really important model and path for other women to follow into sailing and competitive sailing in particular. Your expertise in expanding to other high performance classes is no doubt growing with these experiences. So this will be very exciting to watch your development in your trajectory. What would you add to the takeaways from the Cam Farrah story?
No, I mean, just love what you're doing and just say yes to every opportunity. That's like the best advice. And the thing I'm most thankful for is just always, didn't matter what kind of boat I was getting on, I was just getting on every single boat that I can growing up. So I loved that. It was good.
Thank you, Cam Farrah, for talking today. I will put your social media handles in the show notes for the podcast, and we'll see you soon at the North American A-Class Championship in Pensacola, April 9 through 13. Thanks again for meeting today, and I look forward to seeing you in April.
Thank you, Tim. I really enjoyed talking with you.
On the way to becoming the North American epicenter of high-performance sailing, Sail Pensacola is orchestrating initiatives that make recreational and professional sailors, local, regional, national, and international races, and sailing technology jobs in the Pensacola Bay sailing ecosystem. At Sail Pensacola, we say, sailing is our business. Visit our website at sailpensacola.org.